Hi everybody, it's Neil Shah, Chief De-Stressing Officer at the Stress Management Society and author of the 10-Step Stress Solution. And as part of our Stress Awareness Month activities, as you may well be aware, we've got our 30-day challenge. And part of that, we are connecting with, engaging with, and speaking to people I respect, admire, or I just genuinely feel the world needs to hear from. And today I'm really honoured and happy to have a wonderful guest, Caroline Hounsell from Phoenix Philosophy. We had crossed paths a couple of months ago in a very different world, and we had some very, very interesting conversations, and I felt like the world needed to hear from her. So firstly, welcome, Caroline. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to talk to us today.
Thank you.
And do you want to tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Okay, I've got a lot of hats. I am a psychotherapist. I'm also a writer. I've also a previous director at Mental Health First Aid England. I'm a founding member of Mental Health First Aid England. And essentially, I very much see myself as a health activist.
Wonderful. What does that mean?
That means that we can't really separate like physical and mental health. We've been doing that for a long time. And it's a bit about how do we break down the stigma in every walk of life around health? How do we become the best versions of ourselves? So I'm really interested in anything that touches on health, physical and mental health. Because for me, like when I'm in pain, for example, it gets me down. Like physical pain, it gets me down emotionally. And when I am in emotional pain, I can feel it. We can all feel it in our bodies. Do you know what I mean? Whether we have kind of tummy problems, whether we have kind of neck problems and back problems, and also some of us get like skin problems. So we can't really differentiate between sort of physical and mental health. So a health activist to me is about kind of at the moment I'm distributing loads of information around mental health in this lockdown period, trying to make people aware of some of the risks, but also how to look after themselves. But also at the same time, it's about choosing your conversations. And so I've had quite, incredible conversations. You and I had a conversation in a cloakroom at the House of Lords, wasn't it? And it's about choosing those conversations and just being really honest about kind of how you feel, what you think, and maybe sometimes knowing when to challenge. That's really important.
So yeah, it was just an innocent conversation. In case anyone's worried, we were just getting our coats and having a conversation. It's just when you say we had a conversation in a cloakroom, we might don't want anyone getting the wrong idea.
Of
But no,
course.
it was a fascinating conversation, and I think there was some really powerful things that we touched on, which has obviously led us to having this chat today. So thank you for taking the time to do that. I guess the first thing that I'd really like to explore and just share with all the people listening today is why do you do what you do? What got you into this? Is this just professional desire, or is there more to your commitment to being a health activist?
Okay, so I guess this goes right back. People say, "How did you get into mental health?" And personally, I was born into mental health. My mum still has quite a severe mental health issues. She struggles really from depression, anxiety. She's been suicidal, but conversely, she's also and has been the most successful businesswoman and leader. So, I grew up with kind of mental health being a bit of a dirty word, a bit of a secret. And, I remember being at school, I never learnt about mental health at school. I remember being in a really difficult transition in my 20s when you're transitioning from university to working life and really struggling with that transition, but not knowing what was going on. And then for me, I think the clincher was the fact that in my circle of friends, like everybody always used to come to me and, have conversations with me about kind of what they were experiencing. And everybody used to say to me, "Oh, you're a really good listener." And then I think, that always got me really interested in psychology, but I needed to be interested with my upbringing. And then finally, I was working in the world of careers consultancy. So I was doing a lot of kind of one-to-one chats with people, and we would always get into these conversations around mental health. And I think finally, the final end of this was when, after the birth of my first child, I was diagnosed with postnatal depression and PTSD. So suddenly I was on the other side, and that was terrifying. because I'd always been the person that had been supporting people, and suddenly I was then on the other side. And I thought, I started to study a little bit of counselling for my own interest. And then I thought, God, I could really do this as a career. And so then I did a psychotherapy qualification. And I've been doing that for the last sort of 14 years. And about the same sort of time, I also was a founding member of Mental Health First Aid England. So I guess it's this passion and life experience. And I think something deep inside of me wants to make it better. Like it just, things can be better relatively easily, in my experience, particularly if we take responsibility for what's going on for us and we're brave and we're prepared to fight those and look into those places that are really difficult.
And that's a really interesting thing you said there, that things can be better and can change very quickly if we're brave, but also we're willing to take action. It's not about knowing, it's about doing. And I think for a long time, in various different aspects of kind of the challenges we're facing on the planet today, we've known the answers, but there's resistance. And primarily that resistance comes because we are changing something new, something different, and that's uncomfortable. You've got to step out of the comfort zone. It's a lot easier just to stay where it's easy and comfortable and we just do what we've always done, but then we're going to get what we've always got. And I think it's very, very poignant and very relevant you raise this, given where we are right now, because change has been forced upon us, literally over the last 6 to 8 weeks, where the way we live our lives, the way we interact, the way we engage, what we do on a daily basis has radically changed. And there are a lot of people that are really struggling and suffering because they're yearning for the way things used to be. And I think this is one of the things I really like to get into is, well, in the past, you may have known that eating healthy and exercising and getting good night's sleep and all these things are good for you. But that didn't necessarily mean you did it on a daily basis. We have known that using plastics and overconsumption and heavy use of fossil fuels is damaging the planet. We've known that. We've not done anything about it. In the last 6 weeks, we've done more for the climate and for the ecology and for the environment than we have in the last 20 or 30 years. So I think this is where, in a way, change is being forced upon us. How can we be ensure? How we start again? How can we ensure that we are embracing and supporting ourselves and each other through this change process? Because we are very adaptable, to ensure that this doesn't end up becoming a massive sort of global stress, anxiety, panic, and mental health pandemic.
Yeah, I think that's okay. So there's a number of things that come to mind when you speak. I always believe that we start from the inside out. Okay, and it's just really important. Often, many of us spend so much time trying to fix the outside. A classic is you start cleaning the house when you feel out of control, right? But inside, when we just don't acknowledge a lot of stuff or do any work inside. So my focus is always inside out. Okay, and you're right. This change has been forced on us, and we're in this massive grief situation at the moment
It's
where
almost bereavement, right?
it is. And if you look at the loss cycle, it just follows it, and it doesn't follow it seamlessly. That we can go through different stages at different times, but first of all, there's disbelief and shock. And then there might be a lot of anger or
Denial.
fear, and it moves through all of these things. And before we move all through, finally we get to acceptance, and after acceptance is almost an anticipation, a looking forward to. So first of all, I think the question is, what does this lockdown mean to me? That needs to be our first question. What's my experience of this process? And take responsibility for it. And then think about, we often talk about reframing in things like CBT, for example, and thinking about our thinking. And, how do and in my experience, we often talk about things like, inner child work. And I think, without getting too, diverted, there's a lot of issues that we face as adults come down to a lot of issues around our inner child. And I suspect, the change is really confusing for many of us. The confusion of not knowing where we're going. Many of us have lost our incomes, and our livelihoods. And fundamentally, that's a basic need, to have a roof over your head and be able to afford to live. For those of us that are, and then thinking about the environment, your point around the environment, around how we've not really, many of us are not really engaged in that topic. We've almost had our head in the sand. We've had our fingers in our ears and we've not wanted to listen, because it means moving from our usual behaviours, and we're not prepared to do that. We haven't been prepared to do it. And of course, the amount of meetings that, that I've been insisted that I go to, for example, around changing behaviour, that are in central London. I don't live in central London, I live about 2.5 hours away, that are in central London, say 8 a.m. in the morning, and that I have to get up at silly o'clock because nobody is accepting that I can do that virtually. Yeah. And now, of course, suddenly everybody's doing everything virtually, and we're realising we're doing it really well. So, we are resistant to change because we are creatures of habit. So there's a bit of that. There's a bit of the grieving process. And there's a bit of, can we come out of this disaster, reframing it and finding some positives? And maybe some of that will be environmental, maybe some of that will be personal. But like I always said, work from the inside out and everything becomes in balance, because we can't fix externally if we're not fixed internally.
You're absolutely right, and I think the analogy that comes up, one that I often cite, is when you're on a plane. I know it's going to be a while till most of us are on the
Yeah.
plane again, but before the plane takes off and they go through the safety instructions, they talk about what to do if there's a drop in cabin pressure and the oxygen mask comes down. If you need a temperature of an old person, a sick person, a child, you've got to put it on yourself first. And a lot of people feel that that is selfish, but I believe it's actually selfless, because the people that have taken care of their own needs are the ones that are best equipped to support those around them. Now, I guess the challenge for all of us is remembering that when we face challenges in our life. I'll put my hand up, quite literally, that this is something that has challenged me. I have been delivering workshops and programs to people and companies around the world for the best part of 2 decades now. I could do it inside out, upside down, without even batting an eyelid. And I've done webinars and teleconferences and web meetings before, but actually delivering a full-blown program electronically is something that brought a huge amount of fear and anxiety for me, because I'm really good at what I do in one setting, and it's just like, well, it's kind of like, if you're a skier and someone says, drop your skis, put on a snowboard. You've never snowboarded before. You go from being an expert to a beginner just like that. And that's kind of how I felt when I delivered my first proper online program a couple of weeks ago, and it was really uncomfortable. But how can I expect and support other people to adapt with change if I'm not willing to put the mask on myself? I'd be willing to embrace that myself. So I think this is where, exactly as you said, it starts with us, because the more comfortable I get, rather than telling people what to do from a textbook or from professional expertise, I'm also able to share personal experience. And I think this is where we are going through this collective process. And by being willing to step out and do what is uncomfortable, we are able to then offer value to others and support others that are going through the same process.
Exactly. And actually, that saying that they say, like, be the change that you want to see.
Absolutely.
But also, even if our words are saying it's okay, 90% of communication is nonverbal. So for those people that we're supporting, whether it be in our families or in our communities or in our workplace, it's really important that there's a calmness and acceptance within us, and a bravery to step outside of what is known. And what I heard you say was that you got really good and really confident in that face-to-face delivery, and that transition online was really different, because what works online is not necessarily what works face-to-face, and vice versa. But it's like, this is we can either look at things as a problem, or we can look at things as an opportunity.
Absolutely.
And this is one big, massive opportunity, because we've got no other option.
Absolutely.
So we have to be up for being a bit creative. So, for example, all of this time, like, I have a lot more time than I normally have. Hence the fact that I've got the pleasure of talking to you now, and I'm, and
I appreciate it. I very much appreciate it.
I'm glad. I appreciate it too. And it's giving me these lovely opportunities to meet new people that I wouldn't normally meet, to think differently about things, and to get involved in different projects, you know, that I normally wouldn't be able to. And it's really exciting because you know, if we always think with the fast brain, for example, which is what I normally do, you know, I spent what 11 years as a, you know, working at MHA and working in a directorship role, huge responsibilities. I had back-to-back meetings. I became an expert around time management and how do I fit the most in the smallest amount of time. And this forced place, like you, where I've done so much of my work is face to face, everybody's put everything on hold, okay? So suddenly a really packed diary for the next 3 to 4 months is now really, really empty for me. You know, I've got my client, my face to face client, but that's weird. So, first of all, I panicked, right? Thinking, what the hell do I do? Because all of that income. And then I just was like, stop, practice what you preach. If you were your own client right now, what would you be saying to yourself? And so I've literally had dialogue with myself and I've decided to do new things. So I'm writing a course, like I was telling you about, and it's called the Real Me course. And I've been wanting to do that course for at least a year, but I've never made time for it. It's been literally at the bottom of my pile. But it's really interesting because not only am I researching, I'm putting in new things, I'm meeting new people. So it's just stuff like that. How do we take what we can't control, let go of that frustration and panic, and stop doing things in our quick brain and give ourselves time to connect with ourselves? Because thinking with the slow brain is far more creative and far more productive, and it thinks outside the box. So, you know, how do we think with a slow brain? How do we see these, what's going on for us, as opportunities rather than problems?
I'm only smiling because I resonate with so much of what you've said. But my kind of journey with this crisis, with this experience, started at the beginning of March, where I was away on holiday. I went skiing for a week. I left England in one world and returned to a radically different world on the 14th of March. As you know, after which obviously like the crisis really started. In fact, they were shutting down the ski resort and turfing everybody out the day we were leaving. And then I ended up getting ill. I actually came down with the virus, spent several weeks in bed, and recovered from that. And just trying to get my head around the world as it is today and my life as it is, you know, sort of a few weeks after this situation, this crisis had started. And I was scheduled to be away for the whole of April. I was going to be in Dubai for a couple of weeks on projects with clients, speaking at conferences. And I was going to be in the States, setting up and launching a number of programs, both East Coast, West Coast. And I was scheduled to be in the UK for 5 days for the whole of April, then come back, and I had a friend's wedding, I had trips, I had events, I had loads of activities. And then within a couple of weeks, everything was cancelled. Like literally my whole entire life, personal, professional, social, was completely cancelled. Nothing was left. No football, no events, no festivals, no social activities, no weddings, etc. And it's the first thing I went through, as we kind of discussed earlier, was that process of bereavement, of denial, no, this isn't happening, then anger and frustration and grief. But then, as you've so rightly recognised, you get to that point of adapting and recognising actually there's value here. I've gone almost 6 weeks now, and not been more than a few miles away from where I live. That's not happened in 30 years. You know, I'm always on a plane or on a train. I'm always traveling somewhere or doing something. And it's when life is simplified and those choices are taken away from you, you know, once you get beyond that anger and that frustration and the denial, and you get to a point of emotionally reinvesting, it's incredible what we can do with that space. Nature abhors a vacuum, and you know that the space has been created. I think there's some real value and there's a beautiful gift within what you've said. Is we can now consider what we can do. Just like you're writing a new program, there's a book that I've been working on for the best part of 18 months called The Art and Science of Happiness. And in that 18-month period, I've probably written you know, at best a chapter. So yeah, I'm hoping this period will give me the time and the opportunity to be able to actually get that done. So yes, I think one of the things that I've really learned through my own life experience is when bad things happen, they teach us acceptance or forgiveness. And I've actually learned that there's a step beyond that. And that's not something that, typically we're taught in philosophy or psychology or even religion for that matter. And that's gratitude. Rather than going to, I accept, I forgive, which is still saying this is the problem, but I've made peace with the problem, or I've
Yeah.
forgiven whatever has created the problem, but flipping that on its head. And why am I grateful for this? How is this giving me an opportunity to learn, to grow, to be better, to be bigger, to accomplish more, to achieve more, to be able to contribute more? And that's where I think that I'd love to get your thoughts and perspective on this, is how we can shift to looking at what is it that we can be grateful for from this experience, from this challenge that has been enforced upon us.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of things that sort of come to mind when you were talking, and I think a lot of that is how comfortable are many of us in our own skin.
Mm.
And actually, like you, I usually spend all my time darting from different event to different event, which essentially flatters my ego, let's be honest, right?
Yeah.
Keeps me distracted and keeps me kind of feeling like I'm giving back to the world. So, and that's just a few of the things that it serves, but it serves a purpose, right? So many of us left in our own company, some of us love it. Some of us have never spent this much time in our own other people's immediate family company. It's unprecedented. So there's something about what's the relationship like with ourselves, and then this other part of what you were talking about, which essentially is all about kind of gratitude. A lot of that is habit. So we're raised to well, essentially to survive and make judgments all the time, and sometimes we can get into the habit, whether it be through our caregivers or our experience, of being really judgmental, quite critical, and we're very good at seeing what's wrong in our world and doing what we can to try and fix it, or not doing what we can to try and fix it. But we're not always very good at appreciating the things, and that's the little things, and that's the whole thing behind, I suppose, things like mindfulness,
Mm.
just stopping and appreciating the beauty in the way that the birds are singing right now in spring, or that the way the sunlight touches the trees, or the fact that you've woken up after having a good night's sleep, or the fact that someone's made you a cup of tea, or the fact that actually you haven't got those aches and pains in your body that you had yesterday, or the fact that we've got a roof over our head, or that we've
You woke up in a bed,
we
like you're
woke up
lying in
in a
your bed.
bed.
Yeah.
And I think having spent quite a lot of time in East Africa, like, that's really opened my eyes around what to be grateful for. I spent some time with an amazing organisation called Heart Sounds in Uganda, and essentially it's a lived experience organisation. And I sat in a group of lived experience people there that were scrabbling around with their funding, getting it any way they could, and essentially being social support there. And it was run by an amazing mental health nurse called Emmanuel, who is no longer with us. And unfortunately, he passed away a couple of years ago. But what grounded me about that experience was I was listening to people talk about their day, right? And there was one woman who was clearly psychotic, and all they could do is medicate her with their own money. That's what they were doing. And she was a young woman in her early 20s. And, she was clearly, my experience of her was she was very traumatized, right? Anyway, she sat there and they'd all done what they can. And then she was basically tipped in a wheelbarrow outside their mental health centre, right? They didn't know where she'd come from, and they collected her up and did what they could to look after her and feed her. Another woman was an older woman, and everybody threw stones at her when she walked down the street because she had mental health issues, right?
Mm.
Another guy had depression, and so he had to rent out a spare room in his house, and the mob had moved in, mob-handed, and turfed him and his 6 children out of his own home. And none of the officials, because he was a man experiencing depression, none of the officials gave a hoot didn't really give a crap about him, right? So when you hear stories like that, right, or when you experience the breadth of what's going on in this world right now, the bigger picture, sometimes we're able to get perspective. Or maybe when we've lost someone, really close, you would suddenly we have this rare ability to get perspective and to appreciate those little things. Can we get perspective without having to go to such drastic measures?
Mm.
That's the thing. Can we just get into the habit of appreciating, even if it's just for a moment, the things that really matter to us?
And I think this is what this situation, this experience is giving all of us an opportunity to be able to really value the things that are truly important. Because it's interesting. Obviously, you talked about some of the challenging experiences people have in certain parts of the world. My family's from East Africa as well, from Kenya. I spent a lot of time there, growing up over the years, sort of visiting family on summer holidays as a kid, that kind of thing. And one of the things that really astounds me about my visits to East Africa, and not just East Africa, other parts of the world that have a similar sort of socio-economic background, is the people that have the least, generally speaking, are the happiest people you'll ever meet. The kids in the villages, in the middle of the bush, that will happily kick a couple of plastic bags that they turn into a football around, and the joy that they'll have when you'll give them pens so they can actually go to school and write. Whereas kids in modern cities around the world, unless they've got the latest Xbox or PlayStation or whatever, or the latest iPhone, that they're not happy. So actually, the more we have, the more miserable we tend to get. Now, what's fascinating about where we are? Life has been really simplified. You can't go off and buy that crap you don't need with the money you
Yeah.
don't have. You can't engage with the things that you feel are important and define your life by. So we're going to have to be creative. Now, as I said, like some of the most creative people, some of the most wonderful things I've seen or examples of human ingenuity aren't coming from labs or people with tremendous resources. They're people that are doing it out of necessity. Because I don't know what your thoughts are, but necessity and adversity creates massive opportunity. And I think this is something that we can model and we can learn from because it, it, there are probably people in parts of the world that are laughing at us right now at our so-called misery at the situation that we're going through, because actually a lot of it is self-created because of the lives and the lifestyles we've created. And I think this is where there's an opportunity to embrace something a little bit more simpler and actually start to, as you said, value the things that are important before real tragedy sets in. Just, we've had them removed for a period of time. Hopefully, probably, that our liberties will return and we'll be able to go back to something that looks like the lives we had before. It probably won't be exactly the same, but there'll be some sense of our old lives there. But I think it's important that we take the value of this experience with us and not just go back to the status quo.
Totally agree. Totally agree. There's a really interesting article that we were chatting about previously about, there's going to be whole swathes of people that are going to be making it their mission to convince us that we can just go back to normal and this never happened and just keep consuming and spending. But do you know what? Let's just go back to before this happens, because if we're really honest with ourselves, we weren't happy. We didn't feel connected. We didn't feel that these values that we were living, for many of us, felt like, we wanted them, but we didn't need them. Do you know what I mean? There's a big difference between want and need. And I think, we are massive consumerists. And, do we really need half this shit that we're buying? Do we, is this going to make us a better person because we've bought this car, this latest model, and we've bought this and this and this? Because all many of us are doing is we're racking up the debt, we're forcing ourselves to work more, we're not enjoying our downtime, we are distracting ourselves by any means necessary so that we don't have any moment to really sit with ourselves. And I see this over and over again. I mean, I'm part of this. You're part of this. We're all part of this. I'm not talking from some really self-righteous place. I'm living this life. But this space is about how do we do things differently? And this is about that kind of reframing this space, because I truly hope that individually and society and globally, we make different choices for the better. We actually give a crap about human rights and animal rights and the planet's rights. We choose to buy from ethical sources, not the one that's really cheap with a very, very damaging chain of human interactions and pollution. What let's take a risk to be doing things differently, things that actually we know deep inside feel good, because it never feels good when we cut corners and we do things for the wrong reason. If we're really honest with ourselves, most of us who've got emotions and empathy and connection know when something is right. And often we convince ourselves about something because it's easier, it's cheaper, it's because everybody else is doing it. But, you know, we neglect to connect with ourselves. And, you know, I just, I really hope we come out of this as a better place.
I'm tingling because there's so much of what we're discussing now that is really not just resonating. I think I've had a bit of a light bulb, but as I'm sure you would agree with, as a global community, many of us are addicts. We're addicted to consuming because we've been trained that way. We're good little consumers and we give our money to Amazon and eBay and whoever else is demanding it, buying stuff we don't need, money we don't have. And often we're doing it because we want that hit.
Mm-hmm.
You get the first hit the moment you place the order. You get the second hit when it gets delivered. And very quickly, that feeling dissipates. And to have that feeling again, we need to consume again. Because life has been simplified and there's a lot of things we just simply cannot buy or we can't get our hands on, there are many of us that are going through cold turkey.
Mm.
And it's no different to, you know, a heroin, alcohol, nicotine addiction. That initial period of going through cold turkey is uncomfortable because we've got those cravings that cannot be satisfied. But I think there is a tremendous opportunity. And as I said, doing the things in all aspects of our life, not just consuming in terms, and consuming for me is not just what we buy or what we eat, it's also what we're putting into our heads. And the one thing we can consume, and people are consuming copiously, is information through social media and 24/7 news channels. And a lot of this is creating further misery. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because people are telling you it's really bad and the world's going to pot and people are dying and you're probably going to die and you know the economy's crashed and you're going to be stressed and mental health's a big problem. And yet, the more that you consume, the more likely it's going to become real for you, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So, this again, we have the choice to turn the news off, to disconnect from the social media, the WhatsApp, whatever it might be, and actually take the time to be present, to really look at the gift and the value of this experience and of this moment, these moments, as you've so rightly said for yourself, that we didn't have before. Because we're so busy running around chasing our tail.
Absolutely. And as you're saying that, I'm thinking there's something about being curious, isn't there? And there's something about not only being curious in yourself, but curious in the world around you. But there's something about thinking for yourself. Like what I do with my kids, for example, is I teach them to watch the adverts on TV with the sound off. Yesterday, I listened to the briefing with the sound off. Because if we say that 90% of communication is nonverbal, watch the body language, watch the imagery, you'll see through it, watch the adverts, because and then say, okay, so this advert is trying to tell me if I buy this, I'm going to be happier, I'm going to be more successful, I'm going to be more attractive. You know, like, be discerning, be critical with yourself, but be curious with yourself and everything around you. And the problem is that most of us have learned and are taught not to be.
Yeah.
You know, it's deep inside all of us. Like, just wake up to yourself and wake up to what the world is trying to tell you you need or what you should be. And actually, we are all who we are. And we're all imperfect in our perfection, you know. And actually, for me, true happiness is learning just to be our true selves.
And I think that it nicely brings us on to one of the key things, one of the last things I wanted to talk to you about, being completely mindful of your time. I know you're a very busy person. When we were speaking last week, we touched on the subject of leadership during the experience, and you know, obviously being a leader yourself. I just want to get your perspective on the role of leadership and how we can support and guide other people, particularly if you are a designated leader, whether in a business, a community, within your family, or that you wish to be able to step up and support and guide other people through this. So when I'm talking about leadership, I'm not just saying, oh, you're a director or you're a manager, but I'm talking anyone that has the desire to step into a more leadership role, because we need more leaders. And I think one of the challenges that traditional leadership in many ways has failed us, which is why we've got to this point. So I think there's an opportunity for us to all step up and to really reclaim our ability to be leaders in our own right. So just want to talk on that for a moment and just get your thoughts and perspectives, because you shared some really powerful things with me last week, and I'd just like to share that for everybody's benefit.
Okay, I am really interested in leadership. I'm really interested in leadership because leaders, true leaders, are essentially the custodians of whatever organisation and structure that they're supporting, right? They often need to be leading by example, okay? But the problem with leadership and the way that leadership has traditionally been sort of set up is it's a very elitist place to be, right? And so a lot of this is down to opportunities that are given to certain people at certain times. But a lot of that is about the fact that we seem to be swamped with leaders that are absolute narcissists. And it doesn't take us long to look around globally and look at leadership to get that idea. Now, if you just take successful leadership, in my mind, I think good leaders actually don't see themselves as leaders. Because when we look around us in our world and we think, okay, what are these leaders about? These people that are around us that are in this authority position. Can I relate to them? No. Do I want to be like them? Not really. So actually maybe I'm not a leader. Yeah. Well, the fact that you're even asking yourself those questions is a really good sign. Okay. But the thing is, we don't measure ourselves on the leaders that exist, that may be around you imminently or globally. We base ourselves on the leader that we like to have or we like to be. Okay. So so how do we encourage those people, particularly women and people from often socially marginalised communities? How do we encourage people who don't see themselves as leaders to be leaders? And that's where all of those amazing development community programs that exist, that used to exist, before funding was withdrawn, were really useful. I'm interested in that now, but also I think there's something about us challenging leadership. Because the problem is, you get a leader who's a complete narcissist. They've got no interest in your betterment or what's good for that particular family or that community or even that organisation. How can any good come from a leader with that type of mentality? Surely, you talked about kind of being careful about, what you absorb, right? You've also got to be careful about what you give out.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and the problem is that those people, those narcissists and those people that are completely egocentric have got there because of their sheer determination and ruthlessness. So they've got there because then they're prepared to tread over everybody to get there without any consequences. And of course, those of us with a deep sense of morality and empathy can't do that. Because we've lost loads of opportunities because we're not prepared to be that ruthless. Now, so there's something about those of us that are surrounded by leaders, by doing what we can to gently and smartly challenge that, and maybe, kind of keep chipping away. But remember that the mass of all of those people in that organisation, that mass is a really influential mass. So we should never, ever negate our power as people that are following, whether it be through, citizens of the country or the globe or organisations that have small or, small employees to those that have multinational, massive employees. So, good leaders see themselves as custodians of the organisation and the entity. Their job, a good leader's job, is to enable everybody else to do their job better. And a good leader hires people that are better than them. They're not threatened by their ability because they trust, again, it's back to what's inside. They trust in their ability to lead. They have faith in that. And they're not threatened by other people's abilities because good teams are made up of diversity, of people that have different perspectives, different backgrounds, different techniques, different attributes. And instead of seeing that as a threat as leaders, which often they do, it's really important that we empower difference and we are prepared as leaders to be challenged by people that are very difficult, that do challenge everything. Because often what happens in leadership is we surround ourselves with people that just say yes, that think like us, that like mini clones of us. But that's not the recipe for good leadership. So there's lots of things in there for me around leadership.
So obviously, as part of Stress Awareness Month, we're putting out lots of sort of guidance and information for people to essentially support themselves and increase their resilience. So there's kind of two areas that I just want to touch on to kind of close off our discussion today. Number one, just on this topic of leadership, what is the three key tips or bits of advice you give to someone that is in a leadership or aspires to be in a leadership role to ensure that they're best able to support themselves and whoever that they are responsible for through this transit experience? And the second part of the question is for people that are just wanting some information or guidance support from themselves. What are the three key things that you would advise people to be aware of to ensure that they're able to come out strong at the other end of this experience?
Okay, so as leaders, I think it goes back to that point we said earlier about starting from the inside out. Like there are two bits of information around that are directly influential of employees' mental health or people that are, being led essentially. One of those is if their leaders is behaving in an unsafe, irresponsible way. And the other one is if somebody's not looking after their mental health, if the leader's not looking after their mental health. And if a leader is not behaving in a safe and responsible way and not looking after their mental health, it directly negatively impacts all those people around them. So, of course, what we're saying here is look after your mental health, behave in a safe and responsible way is number one. Okay. Number two is listen. Leaders are very often very good at talking. They say they're listening, but sometimes what my experience of leadership is, all different sectors, is that they listen to hear what they want to hear. There's an agenda, okay? And true listening to all your key stakeholders is really important. So, and when we're listening, we're often open to ideas that we've not even thought about. So if you just look at, commercial means, successful organizations have recruited their super fans, listened to them and said, right, how do we develop? Well, how do we give you what you need? It's the ultimate in developing profits. But also when we listen to people, as they feel heard. Okay. And then essentially, embrace risk, look to the fringes of what's going on. Don't stick to conventional kind of proven ways of doing things. Sometimes, the accident invention is the one that's the most, successful. And in fact, that of every 10 initiatives that you might endeavour to try and be successful, maybe if we're lucky, only one is successful. And it's about being realistic with that and investing in innovation. Taking a few risks. So there would be my top three for kind of leadership, just off the top of my head.
What about for individuals? Anyone that wants to ensure that they are looking after their mental health, their emotional well-being? What would be the three key things that you would say from your experience?
I would say the three pillars of health are get your sleep, good quality sleep. Okay, so
on that point, this is one of the things we've heard from a lot of people we've been talking to. That people are really struggling with sleep, waking up in the middle of the night, finding it hard to fall asleep. People are finding it harder than normal to get their normal sleep routines or get decent sleep during this experience.
Yeah, and that is because we're not processing. So it are more anxious. Okay, so if we're struggling to sleep, things like sleep hygiene are really important. Having a bath, if you've got a bath before bed, having a hot drink, making sure you've got a full stomach, minimizing screen time, having your phones out of your bedrooms, getting an alarm clock, waking up naturally if you don't have to be somewhere at a certain time. Talking about how you feel is really important, not bottling things up. Doing things like eating well, minimizing alcohol because it's a depressant, and eating good food regularly.
And just on the talking point, obviously, because we, are in isolation, we're not allowed to catch up with a friend for a cup of tea or a coffee or pop out for a drink or socialise. I've come across many people that are finding it hard to be able to really engage because often, we're British when we're on the phone, which is very polite, and someone asks you how you're doing. It's like, yeah, I'm fine, thank you. I can't complain. I'm not bad. And we just generally don't tend to get into these kind of things because we don't want to burden someone. It's a lot easier when you're spending time with someone and you can actually get comfortable and open up. So, what would your advice be to people that are struggling? And you're obviously saying talk to people. It's not
Yeah.
always the easy thing to do that virtually or telephonically.
Well, it goes back to a couple of points that we've already talked about. It's a risk. It's a lot of Brené Brown stuff where she talks about the risk of being vulnerable.
Vulnerable. Yeah.
It connects to a lot of that. And often when we lead by example and we risk being vulnerable by saying, do you know what, I'm really struggling today, we give permission to express how we feel, but also we give permission to be honest and for the other person to be honest. But also we allow them to help us when we might need that help. So there's something about being really honest and taking a risk and maybe doing things that we haven't already done. You started off by saying, if we always do what we always have done, we're always going to end up with the same sort of results. So if it doesn't work for us, let's do something different. Let's take a risk and let's kind of break down that taboo around talking about how we feel and being honest with people. And then I think the other bit is about habit, which we talked about earlier as well, around how do we get into different habits. Now, for those of us that are not used to talking on technology, it's weird, it's uncomfortable. We don't get that same feeling in our bodies, in our gut, when we would sit in the room. And obviously we physically can't connect, and those of us that are quite tactile, that's a big thing that we're missing. But we can get a hell of a lot from just connecting. And sometimes doing what we're doing now is we kind of see each other's faces, we can see how our responses, and it makes us feel connected and we can have a conversation. And so, embrace Skype, Zoom, FaceTime, WhatsApp, any medium that you want to, and particularly if you haven't done it, try it. Pick up, organize having a call with somebody that you can just be yourself with, and maybe just start the conversation and go, how are you feeling? I'm feeling like this is how I'm feeling today. And just be honest. It's like, and that means we risk, because everyone's in this boat at the moment. It's really up and down. Let's just be really honest. Let's connect, because more than anything, we need connection.
Absolutely. And finally, Caroline, firstly, I really do appreciate and I'm really grateful for you taking the time to talk to us today out of your busy schedule. If people want to find out more about you and the wonderful work you do, how can they do so?
Well, I think I would ordinarily send you to my website, but my website is shocking and it's on my to-do list. So just try and find me on LinkedIn, because my website, believe it or not, hasn't been touched for years because I've been working in Mental Health First Aid England, and that's been one of my to-do lists that has not been a priority. So I think just find me on LinkedIn and, add me. I'm always posting loads of really interesting things. And yeah, just connect me. All my details are on LinkedIn. So Caroline Hounsell, LinkedIn.